It signals that peaceful factory protest is dead. It turns out that among these beloved sisters were exactly 12,431 living, breathing men. He was granted bail by the Kalyan court on a cash bond of mere 50,000 rupees. Back after a break, hello and welcome to Straight Talk with PC. Today, we are here to confront a harsh reality that exposes deep flaws within our system. I'm talking about Kalyan Dombivli's Shiv Sena corporator Ramesh Mhatre. He's a public representative, someone elected to serve and protect the community and look after the welfare and their needs. He today stands accused of launching a violent assault on on-duty doctors in a hospital. But the larger and more unsettling question is this: how did an individual accused of assaulting healthcare workers secure bail almost immediately after being remanded to custody? And mind you, he's never been in custody, he got himself admitted into a hospital. Does our system value the VIP privileges of politicians over the basic safety of our doctors? Let's analyze the facts. First, let's look at the timeline. A family arrived at the Civic Hospital in Dombivli seeking medical attention for an infant. Since the neonatal care unit or the NICU was full, following the standard medical protocol, the doctors advised that the child be shifted to another facility equipped to provide immediate care. Instead of addressing the structural failures of public healthcare infrastructure, Ramesh Mhatre and his supporters chose violence. They stormed into the hospital and physically assaulted the doctors and paramedical staff, delivering slaps and punches even to women staff members, women doctors. Imagine the trauma. A doctor working grueling shifts to save lives is instead subjected to physical abuse. Traumatized by this very incident, two of the on-duty doctors immediately resigned from their posts. We are already facing a severe shortage of medical professions in public healthcare, and incidents like this completely shatter the morale of those who choose to serve. Unfortunately, that has gone unheard. Following widespread outrage and protest threats from the Indian Medical Association, the police finally acted and arrested Mhatre on July 8th. However, immediately upon arrest, Mhatre cited medical issues and was admitted to an ICU. His legal team actively pushed for virtual court appearances, a request that was strictly rejected by the Kalyan court judge, who made his physical presence mandatory. But the real shock to the medical community came later. On July 13th, Mhatre was sent to judicial custody for 11 days. Yet, the very next day, July 14th, he was granted bail by the Kalyan court on a cash bond of mere 50,000 rupees. He spent barely 24 hours in judicial custody. The police explicitly argued in court that Ramesh Mhatre has a prior criminal record and poses a legitimate threat to witnesses and the victims. Despite these explicit warnings from law enforcement, the swift granting of bail raises some serious questions about the loopholes within our own legal framework. What has been the political response to this blatant lawlessness? Shiv Sena MP Naresh Maske stated from Delhi that the party does not condone violence and has issued a show cause notice to Mhatre. But is a paper notice genuinely enough? Until political parties start expelling leaders who display such disregard for the law, the message sent to society remains incredibly toxic, that status will shield you from immediate consequences and nothing can even harm you. Why does this double standard persist? If an ordinary citizen raises a hand against a government official, they face immediate jail time and prolonged legal battles. But when a corporator assaults medical professionals, they receive VIP hospital accommodations and walk out on bail the next day. How does this even work, and how does one even justify this? Using healthcare professionals as punching bags must stop. If we fail to guarantee a safe working environment, qualified doctors will simply stop working in public hospitals. And as it is, we are facing a problem and challenge with that. The investigation and trial will continue, but granting immediate bail sends a devastating message to the medical fraternity. Take a look at this piece of paper. Does it look like it's a full paper? Has something been printed on it? To you, it looks like a blank sheet worth maybe 50 paise. But to the Health Department of Madhya Pradesh, this isn't just paper. This is a fully functional, state-of-the-art, 100-bed civil hospital. I'm not joking. Welcome to Indore's Khajrana area. If you go there looking for the government hospital to get an x-ray or check your fever, you won't find a building. You won't even find a single brick. What you will find is an empty vacant plot of land allotted for a hospital. But on government files, oh, it's a roaring success. For the last 6 years, this ghost hospital has been perfectly functional on paper. The bureaucracy is so efficient that they didn't wait for minor details like building the hospital or buying the land. Instead, they went straight to work on what they do best: paperwork. They approved 87 official posts for this invisible hospital: doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and lab technicians. And because a hospital needs human resources, they have been running a highly organized game of musical chairs. They routinely transfer doctors to this hospital, issue official posting orders, and even shuffled a lab technician onto the roster just last month in June 2026. The staff exists in real life, but the hospital only exists on a piece of paper in a file cabinet. It gives a whole new meaning to the term cloud infrastructure, doesn't it? But let's stop laughing, because while the bureaucrats are busy treating imaginary patients on paper, over 3 lakh residents of Khajrana are forced to scramble to overcrowded facilities elsewhere just to get basic healthcare. This isn't just an administrative glitch or a funny Babu story. It is a terrifying window into the deep systemic rot plaguing the health infrastructure of Madhya Pradesh as well as India. Let's talk straight. Public health cannot be measured by files, cleared budgets, budgets allocated or post sanction. It is measured by the number of working beds, the presence of actual doctors and life-saving equipment that works when a citizen is dying. Let's look at the hard data. The CAG report and independent health dossiers reveal a staggering picture of Madhya Pradesh's reality. The void that exists of the specialists. Community health centers in Madhya Pradesh face a horrific 96.3% shortage of required specialist doctors. If you need a surgeon, a pediatrician or a gynecologist in rural MP, you are largely on your own. The single doctor trap. More than half of the primary health centers in the state operate with just a single doctor. And if that doctor falls sick or goes on leave, the entire health apparatus on that area or of that area shuts down. 1/3 of PHCs have no doctor at all. Then the ineffective sub-centers. Over 75% of sub-centers do not even have male health workers, crippling basic ground-level healthcare delivery, and then of course there's the privatization pushback. The crisis is so acute that the state government recently floated tenders to hand over district hospitals in 12 districts to private players, sparking massive protests from doctors and citizens who fear healthcare will become completely unaffordable and pricey. Lest we think this is just one state's failure, let's widen the lens. India's healthcare sector is booming commercially, projected to hit $1.5 trillion by 2030, but that boom is private, expensive and heavily skewed towards metropolitan cities. For the average Indian citizen relying on the state, the structural deficit is absolutely alarming. On paper, India claims it beat the WHO doctor-patient threshold of 1:1,000 patients. One doctor for 1,000 patients by hitting 1:834. But that number includes every alternative medicine practitioner under Ayush. Strip that away, go into the rural heartland of Bihar, Uttar Pradesh or Madhya Pradesh and you will find people dying of easily treatable conditions because the nearest real doctor is about 50 kilometers away. The National Health Policy of 2017 promised that India's public health expenditure would reach 2.5% of GDP by 2025. We are past that deadline and we haven't even crossed the 2% mark. The budget increased, yes, but infrastructure on ground is struggling to keep pace with the sheer volume of patients. And that is why we are seeing expensive patient care. We live in an era of digital revolutions, high-speed expressways and grand claims of development. But a nation cannot call itself developed if its citizens are forced to sell their land or go into a lifelong debt trap just to pay a private hospital bill. The ghost hospital of Indore is a symptom of a larger disease. It is the disease of intent without execution. It is the comfort of showing a project as completed in an Excel sheet while a mother struggles to find a bed to give birth safely. We don't need healthcare on paper. We need hospitals made of brick, mortar, functioning machinery and living, breathing doctors who are actually where they're assigned to be. What do you think about it? I think we need to raise our voices as concerned citizens, as aware citizens, that what we need are quality doctors, quality health, public health care and expensive, not too expensive treatments. And what we need are specialist doctors and we must learn to treat our doctors with the dignity and respect they deserve. Let's talk about the finest magic trick in Indian politics today, the Post-Election Disappearing Act. Before the votes are cast, a welfare scheme is treated like an all-you-can-eat buffet. But the moment the results are declared, it suddenly turns into a strict calorie counted medical diet. Welcome to the latest chapter of Maharashtra's Mukhyamantri Majhi Ladki Bahin Yojana. Just some months ago, I would say a few years ago, the political rallies were filled with high-octane emotional declarations. The state leadership proudly announced that every single woman was their beloved sister and deserved a monthly gift of 1500 rupees. Rigorous background checks, strict verification, no time for that. Love, after all, does not look at Aadhaar cards. But fast forward to today. The elections are over, the government is formed, and the state treasury is looking back at the cabinet with a blank stare. Suddenly, the administration has developed an extraordinary interest in mathematics and transparency. They launched a massive sudden digital audit. Actually, it shouldn't be a sudden digital audit, it should be a routine audit. And the findings are spectacular. It turns out that among these beloved sisters were exactly 12,431 living, breathing men. Yes, men. Over 12,000 men successfully signed up as Ladki Bahins and pocketed 24.24 crore of your tax money over the period of 13 months. If you ever wanted to see a literal administrative identity crisis, this is it. Watch how the reality of this massive digital purge unfolded across Maharashtra, leaving lakhs of families scrambling to figure out their financial status. But let's strip away the irony, because while it's easy to laugh at a system that cannot differentiate between a brother and a sister on an Excel sheet, the ground reality for lakhs of women is devastating. Direct benefit transfers are not a luxury. For a poor family, that money pays the electricity bill, buys the children their textbooks, or keeps the kitchen running. Today, women living in the exact same economic conditions find themselves divided. One receives a text message of credit. The other gets a digital notification telling her she's suddenly ineligible. This is not a regular administrative cleanup. This is a massive structural crisis that exposes the deep irresponsibility of rushing out massive financial freebies to win an election, only to silently choke the system and delete the beneficiaries once the political objective is achieved. Let's look at the hard, unvarnished data coming straight out of Women and Child Development Department. The scale of this post-election exclusion is staggering. At its peak, the scheme boasted an official registration of 2.43 crore to 2.63 crore beneficiaries. Following the verification audit, over 92 lakh names have been completely removed, effectively shrinking the beneficiary pool by a massive 38%. 38% of the people who were taking these funds were ineligible as per the records. The highest concentration of removals and absolute rejections came from the B district, exposing how heavily the initial registration rush bypassed proper protocol. The accounts that have now been flagged as ineligible didn't just sign up yesterday, it already collectively received approximately 14,000 crore in public funds before the authorities managed to halt the payments. On average, these unverified accounts receive monthly payouts for 10 months straight. Before the elections, the political leadership proudly promised to hike the monthly payout from 1,500 to 2,100. Cut to the latest fiscal budget. That promise has been silently shelved to manage the state's soaring debt, and the overall scheme outlay was downsized from 46,000 crores to 36,000 crores. Why did this happen? Because arithmetic doesn't care about political rhetoric. The CAG recently flagged massive significant deficiencies in the financial management of the scheme. Look at how the fiscal pressure has mounted on the state treasury. The government claims that they are removing these 92 lakh women to weed out taxpayers and luxury car owners. But ask yourself this witty question. Why wasn't this strict KYC and documentation checking done before spending 14,000 crores of taxpayers' money? Our hard-earned money in the hope that the welfare scheme would truly benefit those who deserve it. The answer is obvious. Doing rigorous checks before an election slows down the distribution of political goodwill. It is much easier to launch a scheme in a hurry, claim credit, win the mandate, and then let the bureaucracy slowly strangle the eligibility criteria to save the state from bankruptcy. Welfare is a constitutional duty. Direct benefit transfer to the poorest of the poor is a proven way to alleviate distress. But when welfare schemes are turned into competitive, unverified political tools, the economy suffers, and the poor end up feeling cheated. If a government cannot sustain a financial promise to its citizens, it shouldn't make them under the guise of love. Deleting 38% of your beneficiary list isn't an achievement of digital auditing. It is an admission of administrative failure. Our mothers and sisters don't need political tokenism that vanishes right after election day. They need sustainable economic policies. What this also reveals is that today welfare schemes are now lying at the mercy of political rhetoric as well as political outcomes. The 38% cuts also shows how no checks and balances were carried out, and this corrupt practice continued till this audit did not become public. Today, as I record this, let's bypass the political noise and look directly at a large, stark, huge challenge unfolding right now at Jantar Mantar in New Delhi. As you watch this, Magsaysay Award winner and innovator Sonam Wangchuk has crossed day 18 of an indefinite hunger strike. By the time I upload this video, it could be his day 19. This is not a token media managed fast. This is a rapid breakdown in real time. According to medical bulletins released from the site, Wangchuk has already lost 8.5 kgs. His blood sugar levels have repeatedly dropped below 70 milligrams per deciliter. His ribcage is visible, he is losing vital muscle mass, he is in immense physical pain. And what is the structural response from the corridors of power? Absolute total silence and total non-concern, total apathy. There is not even a single union minister who has met him. Not even a single formal invitation to talk has been dispatched. This isn't just silence, it is an active administrative strategy to ignore a crisis until the news cycle moves on. Tonight, we aren't just discussing a hunger strike, we are looking at the data of an institutional freeze. To understand why an engineer is starving himself in the capital, we have to look at the cause of this specific fast. It is a national crisis in our education system. On June 28, Wangchuk sat on the pavement at Jantar Mantar. His strike is bound directly to the raging national emergency, the systemic failure of competitive examination managed by NTA, specifically the widespread NEET paper leak scandals. He is on a strike alongside student organizations under the Cockroach Janata Party banner. His demand is very clear, sharp and institutional and morally valid. The immediate resignation of Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan to establish accountability and transparency for the broken dreams of millions of students. There are so many students who took their own lives rather than reappear in an exam. Let's call this what it is, the bureaucratic playbook of exhaustion. The political apparatus has figured out that if you don't engage, if you don't send negotiators, you deny the protest any oxygen. The official narrative from the ministry attempts to dismiss these student bodies and activists as disruptive elements. But how do you dismiss an innovator who has spent his entire life building schools for marginalized children and engineering solutions for the country? So this is why they're dismissing it. The state's calculation relies on two assumptions. They assume you, the viewer, are too exhausted by your own economic struggles, your own problems to care about some activists fasting in Delhi. They also know that primetime television will focus on what the government wants it to focus. Perhaps celebrity weddings or political theatre, the TMC, the Maharashtra politics, rather than focus on senior citizen on sitting at Jantar Mantar. While opposition leaders issue frantic statements on social media begging him to stop, the ruling executive remains completely insulated. When did a demand for clean, uncompromised examinations become a crime that warrants absolute silence? When did governance become completely immune to the moral weight of a hunger strike or its accountability towards the future of this country, the youth of this country? As we wrap up, remember Sonam Wangchuk's own words from his protest bed. When his colleagues begged him to save his life and end the fast, he replied, "Don't ask me to end my fast. Ask the government why they don't even want to have a dialogue." The danger here isn't just that a vital, brilliant voice for our country is fading away on a pavement in Delhi. The danger is what it signals to the rest of India. It signals that peaceful factory protest is dead. It signals that no matter how right your data is, no matter how your pure intentions are, the machinery of state will not look at you, will not engage with you. Do not look for a hero in Sonam Wangchuk while sitting on your couch. Be the citizen that forces the conversation. Demand to know why the education ministry remains silent. The state's ultimate weapon is your apathy. Don't let them use it. Raise your voice. Speak up. Let's talk about bringing accountability back in governance. Let's talk about moral responsibility towards the role that you play as part of the cabinet in the government of India. And let's hope that this government will speak up and will engage with Sonam Wangchuk and understand from him what he expects of its government, of his government, and what the students of the country are protesting about. I hope the government would be sensitive enough to at least attempt to understand the challenges that the students face and probably understand the demands of accountability coming from Sonam Wangchuk. Thank you for watching and do share this video, and let's hope that the protest reaches its conclusion and there's a conversation that begins to happen which is part of a healthy democracy.